My name is Lilo Armandi, and my ego is a liar. And guess what? Yours is too. I'm a combat veteran, mother, and recovering high performer. This is a show about the lies we tell ourselves, how they shape us, how they break us, and what it takes to finally let them go. Let's uncover our lies to seek the truths underneath. Because before there's clarity, there's chaos. Let's navigate it together. So don your oxygen mask and take a deep breath. Welcome to Lies My Ego Told Me. Welcome back, liars and truth seekers, to another episode of Lies My Ego Told Me. I'm Lilo, and I'm honored to have with me today one of the most courageous women that I know. Her story begins with the humblest of beginnings in an Afghan refugee camp and soars into her cockpit where she circumnavigated the globe. Shaesta Waiz made history in 2017 as the youngest woman to fly solo around the world in a single-engine aircraft. But her journey from refugee to record breaker is about more than aviation milestones. It's about a young woman who was told to stay small, stay quiet, and never draw attention to herself. But instead, she chose to become a beacon of hope for the most vulnerable. Shaesta was born during the Soviet-Afghan War. Her family was displaced and her lives were threatened. They eventually escaped and emigrated to the U.S., settling just outside of the San Francisco Bay Area. Although living in the U.S., she was raised in a traditional Afghan household where girls weren't allowed to dream beyond the boundaries set by family. But Shaesta broke every rule and along the way founded the nonprofit Dreams Soar, inspired thousands of people during her global flight, and today uses her voice to provide for the underserved and advocate for human rights, especially for the women and girls left behind in Afghanistan. But like all of us, Shaesta believed a lie. And what makes her story so extraordinary is how she transformed that lie into a mission that spans continents and countless lives. Shaesta, I am thrilled to have you here today.
Thank you, Lilo, for having me. I'm such a big fan of your podcast.
Thanks. That means so much to me because I think yours was the first podcast that I ever guested on.
Yeah, that's so amazing.
So let's start at the beginning. Your story begins in an Afghan refugee camp, born to parents who were barely of age themselves, fleeing war and uncertainty. In fact, 20 days after your mom gave birth to you, your family fled to Pakistan before eventually making it to America. From those beginnings to now having your name on the wall of honor at the Smithsonian Museum, that's not just an incredible journey, it's an audacious one. And yet for much of your life, you carried a belief that you had no right to fathom anything so bold. So Shaesta, what was the lie that your ego was telling you?
The lie that I believed was that I simply don't deserve to dream this big.
And where did that come from? Were those voices internal, external, that were telling you that this dream was just too much?
You know, it's just such a mixture of things. It was both, quite honestly. It was a lot of my roots, my background, the way I don't want to say I was trained to think, but just the way that I organically thought about things. And then externally too, because just my upbringing in California, the school district I went to, just didn't have a lot of like role models and heroes that were like in and out of my life. So it was definitely a mixture of both.
So let's start back to the beginning. We'll go back to Afghanistan because you've come to realize that the country that you hardly knew as a child, the one that you fled at only 3 weeks old, has really become the common thread that's woven throughout your story. So you didn't know it until you were an adult, but your dad actually dreamed of becoming a pilot. That was a dream that was stolen by the war. And so how did your parents' interrupted dreams shape your understanding of what was possible and then influence your own belief about ambition?
You know, I think both my mom and dad has contributed to my dreams, both, I don't want to say in a bad way, but in a way where it was restricting and also in a way where it was very motivating and supportive. So as you shared, my dad had this dream to fly. So if you meet my dad, the first thing that you will pick up on within minutes of meeting him is he's very curious of like where people are and what are their traditions and where have they been. So this sense of travel is just so special for my dad that he often leads with it every time he meets someone. And when he was very young, he aspired to fly. And flying in Afghanistan is really for the brightest, the best, the privileged. It's not available to everyone because those scholarships typically You go to India. The Afghan government at the time was funding these scholarships. You do all your flight training there, and then you come back and you fly, you get ready to fly civilian aircraft for the airlines, or cargo. And that was his dream. And from what he remembers, like 17 is when he got the news that he was going to go to India. And then around 18, 19 is when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, and he quickly realized that, that dream was not possible anymore. And from what he remembers, he just kind of closed off that idea of becoming a pilot, put it in the back of his mind and said, I can't do it, but maybe one day one of my sons will. And when that day comes, I will be so proud and happy and supportive. Yeah, that was my dad. My mom is very interesting. So my mom, she was very young when she got married. She had my sister when she was 16, and she didn't finish school. She barely could write and read. And, when she got married, just years later, the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. She then, fled the country, came to America. So in some ways, she had this like oblivious idea that like things are possible. And, for Afghanistan back then, for women, it was very rare for them to travel and have these experiences and adventures. I mean, it was really sad and under intense times, but she just thought she wasn't going to make it out and she was going to be stuck in the country. But that wasn't the case, luckily. And so growing up, she always had this idea of like, things are possible. And she was very encouraging. She never told us that we couldn't do something because of who we were, our backgrounds. So my dad was extremely strict and had high expectations for us. My mom, on the other hand, was very nurturing and supportive. So I feel like the two of them, in so many ways, made me think that I couldn't do anything big or grand in life. And at the same time, as things were happening, they were very supportive and just motivated to help me reach the dreams that I wanted to reach.
And that's such an interesting dichotomy because it's almost the expectation of your success, but like not too much because that would bring too much attention to you, right? Because you were raised in a really strict traditional household and you were only allowed to speak Pashto or Farsi. And as young girls, you and your 5 sisters, so your dad didn't get a boy, he got 6 girls. You told me that you weren't even allowed to participate in activities outside of school because there was a fear that, you might in some way bring shame to your family. So how did this environment reinforce the lie that you didn't deserve to dream big, but at the same time, also, how could you help yourself from being encouraged?
Gosh, this is such a dynamic question. As you mentioned, I grew up in a very traditional household. Like we would only eat Afghan food. We rarely ate out because we were such a big family and, it was expensive to eat out. At home, we would have like what you typically would have in Afghanistan. We didn't have a dining table. We sat on a mat on the floor. We ate with our hands. And we only ate Afghan food. Like very rarely did we eat American food. So the idea of McDonald's was such a luxury for us, and it was so cool. But in terms of clothing, we didn't have to wear a headscarf or anything like that. But we couldn't show our arms. We just dressed very loosely, conservatively. My dad is very religious, and so every Friday they would go in to pray. I went to Sunday school, which is like Islamic school in our community, and we weren't allowed to speak English at home. We spoke Pashto amongst each other, and when guests would come, they would typically speak Farsi. So in so many ways, I grew up as if we were still in Afghanistan. And I think the reason for that is that my parents held on to this idea that someday we're going to be able to go back. And they didn't want that transition to be hard for us. And years later, one of my dad's friends who traveled around the same time as we did, coming to America, they settled in Virginia. We did in the Bay Area in California. He came and visited us, and he was talking to me and my sisters, and, he was speaking English with us. And he turned to my dad and he said, we aren't going back to Kabul. Like, it's a shame that your daughters are not able to speak English fluently and you've been here for years. Like, you are hindering them in so many ways. And this was when I was in middle school. And that's when I started to see my parents' like walls come down a little bit and be more relaxed about wearing like t-shirts, and just introducing us very slowly to the American culture, like giving us permission to dip our toes. Whereas before at home, we just weren't allowed to talk, think, do anything American.
And you told me a story about your after school activities because you were a very accomplished young lady, but you hid it. What was it like living that double life? And what did that teach you about the cost of dreams?
Usually, immigrant families, you just go to school, you come home, you do your chores. So I really loved being active. I was extremely tomboy. I loved being outdoors. I loved playing in dirt. So when I got to middle school and high school, so many of my friends had joined sports teams, and softball was just really cool for me. I really enjoyed it. And it's actually basketball that I played. And my friends were all doing it. And so I would go with them after school to the practices. And my dad typically worked until like 7, 8 p.m. every day during the week. So he didn't know anything. My mom, I would tell her, hey, I'm going to hang out with my friends and we're going to study after school. So I started to go with them to practices. And then before I knew it, I was in conditioning with them, preparing, for the season. And my school, we weren't in any like competitive league. It was just really us playing for the fun of it. So I was allowed to join the team, and they knew I couldn't go to away games. So I would play whenever there were home games, and I loved it. It was so cool to be a part of a team, a group of people sharing this passion. And I think that really awoke in my mind to maybe just like questioning things or pushing back, because pushback is something we just didn't do at home.
And you mentioned that it wasn't really until middle school that you actually started assimilating to American culture. And that was with the encouragement/pressure of your dad's friends. So I assume that you struggled to fit in at school. And so how did that struggle live within you, that being caught between two cultures, Afghan at home, American at school, feed into the feeling that maybe you didn't really belong anywhere?
My whole identity growing up, I felt like it was a big question mark. Like, who am I? I had this very extreme life at home, just so entwined in like our traditions and our culture, our religion. And then at school, it was completely different. So I grew up in the Bay Area in Richmond, California. And that area back so many years ago was where all of like the immigrants, the underprivileged families would go, because the cost of living and housing and everything was extremely inexpensive. And so growing up in elementary school, I had a lot of classmates from different parts of the world. Middle school is where things changed a little bit. I went to a middle school where it was in a more developed area that had a little bit more funding. My classmates were like, blonde hair, blue eyes. And I think that's when I realized how different I was. I mean, I dressed, all of my clothes were from Goodwill or like my sister's secondhand clothes. I was extremely tan. I had dark black short hair. English again has been my third language growing up. I just didn't know where I belonged. Like when people would talk about Afghanistan, I just didn't feel a connection because I had never been there, aside from being born and then coming to America when I was just a baby. So that felt very far away. But in America, I certainly was not American. I did not have blue eyes, blonde hair, light skin. And it was reminded to me that I'm not American. Like when people would meet me, they would immediately ask, where are you from? I never knew. I was like, should I say Afghanistan? And then they would ask, how is it living there? It was a big question mark. It was so confusing for me that like I just kind of stayed quiet and in the background and only spoke when spoken to. But it was extremely confusing. And I never found a place where I felt like, okay, I belong here.
Mm-hmm. You seem to have a rebel streak in you, but you also seemed like you were always searching for something, right? That sense of belonging,
Yeah.
that sense of identity. And aviation kind of became your path to this, showing you that you didn't have to follow a rigid line and then kind of finding this new team, this new world. So tell me about the moment that you discovered aviation and what was it that spoke to you?
When I found aviation, it was kind of the perfect time because growing up, if I had the chance to go on an airplane, I think I would have gone into it being extremely scared and just letting the nerves take over. In high school, we ended up moving to a city called Fairfield High School. It's just about 30 minutes away from Richmond. But boy, did those 30 minutes make such a huge difference. Like for the first time, I could take school books home with me. My old school district, we only had one copy, and that was the copy that stayed in school. And like just my classmates were so driven. They were all talking about college, which was something that I never had any aspirations to pursuing. I truly thought that like the best thing that life could offer me is for me to follow the rules, be agreeable, and then maybe after I graduate from high school, maybe get married, have a family like my mom and women in my family generations before. But in high school, I felt so tired of being the outsider. It just didn't feel good. Like to sit in class and people talk about college prep and SATs and ACTs, and I'm the only one who's just like not engaging in those conversations. And one day it dawned on me that like it's really hard to feel that way in high school. And I didn't enjoy it. And I thought, gosh, if I don't figure out what college is, my four younger sisters are going to find themselves in my shoes when they get here. And I was like, I got to figure it out. Like, of course, I'm not like smart enough or, I could never go to college, but I got to figure it out for them. And so I think that motivation allowed me to just be open and curious and learn about, this whole world of college. And so when I graduated from high school, that's when I was able to travel by myself for the first time. Growing up, we couldn't afford to fly on airplanes, and typically family would always come to us. So I had an aunt and cousins in Florida. And so my parents decided to get me a ticket to fly from California to Florida, the first time as an adult. And I just remember sitting, it was a Delta airline flight in the very back, middle seat, a place where, you're hardly inspired. And, I'm sitting back there and, I felt nervous at first. And then I was like, well, this is really interesting. And I just remember us taxiing on the taxiway, turning onto the runway and like just seeing the beauty of the airport and feeling the power of this aircraft and us accelerating, lifting into the air. I felt so bad. The person who was sitting next to me where the window is, I just kept looking out and I'm sure they were so annoyed, but I kept looking out and just seeing this perspective. My world was so small compared to the real world. And that just unlocked something in my head. And I thought, like, this is so exciting. Like, I never found a profession where I was like, this is what I want to do. Never. But there I was in the middle of this Delta commercial jetliner. And I was just like, I want to learn how to become a pilot. Like, this is so incredible. And that's what did it for me.
And what I find remarkable about that is how easy it is for us to be conditioned by our circumstances, how limiting our beliefs can be when we're only exposed to so much perspective, and how one moment really just can change the trajectory of your life. One experience, one thought, one person that you see can just inspire and spark that. And I love that you fell in love with it, because I joke that aviation is binary. It's love at first flight. You either love it or you loathe it, and you loved it. And I did too. But when you came back from that and you told your dad that you wanted to fly, I'm sure that was a terrifying thing to tell him, because you didn't even have the audacity to tell your parents you want to go to college, tell your parents you want to leave home, tell your parents you want to do a dangerous profession. But this was actually a pivotal moment for you and your dad. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So Gosh, I thought that probably the coolest thing I'd ever do in my life was to fly in an airplane from California to Florida. And now I think about it, it blows my mind that 80% of the world's population has never flown in an airplane, which is so mind blowing to me. But like, I get it. So, I thought that was the coolest thing. And that whole experience, sitting in the airplane during the flight, it just kept unlocking so much for me. And I remember when I landed, I was like, what am I going to do with this? What am I going to do with like this new passion? Like in my head, I was telling myself, like, there's no way that my father will agree to me pursuing a male dominated career. Like, typically women are preferred to be at home and living, like the mother, the housewife, living that role. And I just can't imagine like being a pilot, you're never home. There were just so many reasons stacked against me for my dad to say, no, like this is impossible. So like I just spent so much time anticipating, like, okay, he's gonna say no. What am I gonna say after that? Like, and I have to be strong. Like my dad is the eldest brother. He lived a very intense life. He had to grow up very quickly. Dreams were just something that like I never heard him talk about. It was always reality. Like, this is our budget. This is how much money we have to spend. He just has always been so like realistic and practical. And so I went up to him and after like a lot of thought, and I sat down and I was like, you know what? I just have to come out with it and tell him. And so like I told him, I was like, Dad, I figured out what I want to do with my life and I want to learn how to become a pilot. And I was so ready to like have all these realistic, like talking points to defend this new, idea that I had. And his reaction was something I would have never ever imagined. He looked at me and he just kind of like looked away for a second and like he just kind of stood up. He didn't say no, he didn't say yes. And then, like he was like, okay, and like just walked away. And I was so baffled. I'm like, what just happened? Is this real? Am I have to be dreaming? Like this cannot be real life right now. And I didn't have the courage to question it. And I was like, gosh, if I do, then maybe he's going to change his mind. So I let like everything settle. And like a week or two after, I was like, Dad, are you sure it's okay for me to do this? Like, do you have any questions? And he was like, yeah, I'm sure it's going to be hard. But then that's when he told me the story about him and his dreams. And he said, it was such a passion of his to fly. And it was devastating that that was taken away from him. And so when I brought that up, he immediately thought, like, who am I to take this away from her? I know what that feels like. And then he remembered, he like told himself if he were to have a son, he would be supportive and that son, flying around the world. Of course, God blessed him with 6 girls. So it was a shock for him. I've never seen my dad shocked. And that's really how it all came together.
I love that story. So tell me about how you went from this inspiration of a career to actually bringing it to fruition.
Yeah, so when I got back from Florida, I actually went to my high school. I met with my guidance counselor. I had graduated at this point, but I went back and I told them about this new inspiration that I have and this new direction that I want to go into. And he said, well, I think the only place you can go to is this university called Embry-Riddle. And they're in Florida. And I'm like, oh my gosh, maybe it was meant to be. And so, so I started to do research and, Lilo, I think telling my dad was just like the first battle because I have 2 uncles who are extremely strict. Like they weren't as open as my dad was. Like I remember my uncle saying like, you're going to bring so much shame to the family because you're going to be flying with men in a closed space. Like, why would you even think it's okay to think that that's a career that you would pursue? Like the fact that you are even thinking this is shameful. And I remember my grandma was really sad, like devastated, because she was like, you're never going to get married. Like, no Afghan man is going to marry a woman who's not home. And she was just like, that was just so devastating for her. And so it just was like very confusing for people who would ask me questions like, why would you want to become a pilot? It was this constant uphill of like, no, why? And I couldn't shake off the feeling that I felt, which was, quite honestly, Lilo, it was a place of belonging. Like that was the first time in the airplane where I just felt like I belonged. Everything made sense. My emotions, my perception of things, like it all came together. And I just couldn't shake that off. Like I finally found that, and everyone is telling me to let it go. Anyways, I ended up going to junior college. I wasn't the brightest student, especially in math and science. Those were like classes that I would just barely get by. And so I took the time in junior college. I just approached everything like, okay, this is a pilot in the flight deck, figuring out this like calculus equation, like, just putting those filters on to like stick with it, And through those 2 years at junior college, I applied to like every scholarship known to man. And my story was, I didn't know who I was, and now I know. And like, I want to go to this university. And so, like, that was the whole process. And when I got there, it was this sense of like, great, I am amongst just some of the smartest people. People who, when they were kids, they knew they wanted to fly. People whose parents were pilots or like in the military who flew incredible missions and aircraft. And I felt so like I didn't belong. And what kept bringing me back and like making me show up the next day was that feeling I would get during flight training when I would be flying. Like it just felt like the world was mine. And I'd never felt that before. And so it was an uphill battle, but what kept me coming back and staying strong and just figuring it out and getting through it was that I found where I belong. And I couldn't let that go.
I love that where you found where you belonged is alone in a cockpit.
Yeah, I know.
You told me that you love flying because the aircraft is unbiased and it doesn't judge you, and it only demands precision and focus. So how was that different from the rest of the people in the world around you?
Every time I'd get on the plane, like I remember my first solo cross country. It was at a nearby airport in Florida, very close to Daytona Beach, where I did my flight training. And it was so exhilarating. I flew over a pond solo in this plane, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is unreal. I flew over water. I think like being in the airplane, the noise of like, you can't, or like, where are you from? Like what back, all of these things that were just loud noise in my head, like refugee, come from a family of 6 girls, extremely strict parents, grew up in an underprivileged school district. All of that was silenced. And I loved that, like, the only thing that mattered was my ability to fly that airplane. And that plane would take me anywhere I wanted to go in the world. And like, that plane didn't care what I looked like, where I came from, what my religion was, none of that. It was just such an unbiased environment. And I remember I kept telling myself, I would love to like bottle this experience up and share it with people all over the world who wake up every day thinking, I can't do something because of this. Like, you can. You just got to find a place where you could silence that noise and like move with purpose and like a sense of you've got this, like you're going to do it. And the aircraft gave me that space to just dream and be and command and even learn more about myself. Like I didn't know I could, do a cross country and land with like, a 10-knot crosswind. Like there was so much that I was discovering about myself by being in the cockpit that it kept like fueling this idea that I need to do this.
Yeah. And when you're alone in it, you have to tell yourself, I can, I must, right? And I will. And I love that you found your confidence in probably one of the most dangerous situations.
Yeah. Yeah, that is that is me right there.
uh, so I think a lot of people would assume that the natural progression would be either going to the airlines or even joining the military. So you explored both of those, but you didn't pursue either of them.
I kind of shared with you that, like, growing up, it was very Afghan in our household. We didn't get to watch a lot of TV, but my grandfather loved, like, the History Channel, CNN. I remember I was maybe like 9 or 10, and all my siblings went to sleep. It was just my older sister and I. We were downstairs. My father was with my grandfather watching TV, and it was explaining the current situation in Afghanistan at the time. And what happened was, they were bringing women to this soccer field and executing them without any sort of due process or trial, because they had either, spoken in public or was running a business or reading a book. And I just remember seeing that execution and being devastated and thinking, like, that could have been me. That could have been my mom. That could have been, like, I have 5 sisters. It could have been any of us. And I remember that documentary was so powerful, what I had seen. And I thought, like, no matter what I do in life, I need to have this sense of duty to do something for all the girls that didn't make it out. Like, I was so lucky. And that has always been in the background of, like, even when I was learning how to fly, I was like, how does that tie into everything? Like, I can't be selfish and pursue this incredible career of flying. Like, I need to think about that. And so when I went into flight training, initially I wanted to be an airline pilot. And I had this incredible opportunity to intern with an airline in the US. And it was amazing. It was the flight ops internship. So I got to sit in the flight deck with the pilots and fly all over the United States. It was such a cool opportunity, but it felt like I wasn't doing any sort of good in any way. Like, I needed to have a purpose more than just carrying passengers from point A to point B. And then I went out to Alaska to learn about the National Guard. The idea of flying military jets was also very exciting. And I thought, well, there's a purpose there. You're serving your country, you're being protective. And I remember one of the pilots at the Alaska Air National Guard unit pulled me aside and said, listen, we have a lot of missions in Afghanistan. Like, you have to think about, how emotional that could be for you. And you are, a service member first. Like, your job is to protect the United States. So you may have missions there that could be really hard. So think about that. And so that really changed my mind. And it was so frustrating because there I was in an environment where everyone knew exactly what they wanted to do. They wanted to fly for this airline. They wanted to fly for cargo for FedEx or join the military. And there I was in this confused space that just made me feel even more out of the norm. Like, it just felt like, gosh, I finally found a place where I belong, but I don't know where to go. And I kept thinking, like, if I could do anything, what would that be? And I kept coming back to this idea of, like, flying in an airplane around the world and introducing them to aviation. And I'm like, well, that's silly. That doesn't exist. And then I had this, like, epiphany, like, okay, if it doesn't exist, fine. What's stopping me from building it? And so that's when I had this idea of starting a nonprofit. And, initially people thought I was so crazy. Like, I want to fly a single engine airplane around the world. What? Around the world? And I said I wouldn't do it if there weren't outreach events, because what would be the purpose? Like, there had been women who'd flown around the world, but I wanted to do outreach events along the stops to connect and inspire with young kids and talk to them about this incredible industry of aviation. And I couldn't shake that dream off. And so 5 years of planning, preparing, showing up to every industry event, talking to everyone about me doing this. At first, it was a crazy idea, but as the 5 years progressed, people realized that I wasn't giving this up. And by year 5, people were like, wow, you are committed. You're dedicated to this. At this point, like, what can I do to help you? And so, with an all volunteer team, our nonprofit grew to 40 volunteers. And we started to get sponsors like ICAO, which was incredible. And then one by one, industry companies like Jeppesen, Garmin, Bendix King, Honeywell, they all started to come in and support, mainly because of the outreach, which was amazing. And that's how, like, I went from, going through flight school to just really being lost and like, what do I do? And, now when I talk to young people, I tell them when you're lost, that is the best time because you get to really flesh out what's important for you and carve out like where you want to go. You have clarity because you're so lost. And then, you chart a new path from there. So, yeah, that's how it kind of like all came together.
So it was 2012 when you decided that you were going to do this. You mentioned that it took 5 years, and the nonprofit that you launched is called Dreams Soar. And so you are telling your story, trying to get support, which, I do think it's a really lofty and quite honestly crazy goal that people probably thought, who is this girl? Again, the audacity of her. Because when you started this journey to pursue this global flight, you only had 250 flight hours, which it sounds kind of a lot, but if you're in the industry, that's very novice. And by the time you left, you had just 500 hours. And a lot of people were doubting your ability and citing your lack of experience. And some people even nicknamed you Shaesta the Disaster.
Yeah.
So how could you be so bold? And you announced this dream to the world and faced that kind of criticism. Did it reinforce your lie? And then how did you handle all of these people who were intentionally bruising your ego, who were instilling doubt, which is probably a projection of their own insecurities anyways?
Catherine, I think that the one thing that we don't hear about enough are not to take anything away from them, but when you have a person who grew up with resources that, kind of had the way somewhat paved for them to set out to do something, it's incredible. It's extremely hard not to take anything away from them. But like what we don't talk about are the people who grew up not knowing that they could do things or not being told that they could do things, big things, impactful things. At no point did my parents ever encourage me or tell me that I was special or that I could do special things. And it wasn't because they didn't love me. They were just so focused on surviving and figuring out like the next meal, the next day, that they didn't have time to do that with my 5 sisters and me. And so throughout this whole process of like finding myself and figuring out what I want to do, I am so crippled by just like my brain is programmed to think one way, which is to, be agreeable. Don't shake up the calm waves, like follow the steps in front of you. Don't question. So I was just in this internal turmoil all the time. And I knew I couldn't break publicly, but internally it was so hard. And like I had to draw a line and say, okay, yes, there's people that are questioning if I can do this. I know that I can. There are people out there who are emailing the board of directors of my nonprofit, telling board members that I am extremely careless and reckless, that I'm going to kill myself. I drew a line in the sand and I said, okay, all of these people who are naysayers have never flown around the world. I really can't give in to what they're telling me because they don't know what it takes. Like, they don't know what I'm capable of and they don't know what it takes to fly around the world. So, like, their opinions are just, thank you, but no thank you. Like, it's kind of irrelevant. And the line that I drew was, I need to talk to someone who has flown around the world. And I want them to tell me that I can or cannot do this. And I need to know, like, I need this justification or clarification for my own sanity because I didn't grow up being told that I could do stuff like this. And so while in college, I discovered Jerry Mock. So the first woman who attempted to fly around the world, she didn't make it, was Amelia Earhart. And you rarely hear about the first woman who did successfully fly around the world. Geraldine Jerry Mock was a housewife from Columbus, Ohio. She had I believe, 3 children. She flew a Cessna 180 around the world and did it in a very relatively short time. She set the world record. And there were so many things that I resonated with. Housewife, small town. There were just so many similarities. And so I later found out that she wrote a book, and then that book was republished. I was reading her story and I was like, God, I'd really love to meet her. Fast forward, her nephew, Eddie, was able to coordinate a meetup. And it all worked out because she lived in Quincy, Florida. So I drove from Daytona Beach, Florida, where I was going to college, over to her. And in this drive, which was like a 3.5, 4 hour drive, I kept like trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to ask her? What's going to be my first question? What's going to be my follow up question? I was like so nervous because I felt like if she tells me that I shouldn't do this, that's when I really have to walk away. This meeting is really going to determine a lot. And I had like ran through the whole conversation that I'd have with her in my head. I show up to her house. She welcomes me. We sit down in her living room. I sit down and like the nerves caught up to me. I couldn't remember any question that I had planned to ask her. I'm just sitting there. I'm looking at her and it just gets really silent and awkward. And I'm like, oh my God, she probably thinks I'm such a weirdo. And I panicked and I opened my mouth and I was like, okay, Jerry, after you flew around the world, what did you do next? I was like, what a stupid question to ask, like after it came out of my mouth. And she looked at me and she like tilted her head and she smiled and she was like, well, I came home. I spent some time with my husband and children. And the first trip that I went on was to Afghanistan. And Lilo,
Normal
she
things.
said that.
Normal things.
Yeah. Like, what? Like, usually people don't even know that Afghanistan exists as a country, let alone visit. So I just kind of like looked at her and I just was like, what? And I was like, wait, you went where? And she's like, yeah, I had a stop in Pakistan. And I just remember seeing these incredible mountains in the far distance, which was Afghanistan. And I promised myself that I was going to go there and visit. And that's what I did after the trip. And I think her bringing up Afghanistan in a somewhat positive way allowed me to just all of like my walls and my nerves to just disappear. And that's when I was just very real with her. I was like, Jerry, I don't know if I can do this. Like, I've told so many people now, and I'm getting pushback. I'm getting support as well. And you've done it. Do you think an Afghan-American girl can do this? And like, she smiled and she's like, yes. And she's like, a lot of women come to me, but you have like this fire in your eyes that I had when I was doing it. And she's like, you're going to do this. And when you do it, you need a single engine airplane because 2 engines is too expensive and too many things can go wrong. And like, she's giving me this practical advice. And that just like set it for me. I was like, okay, if the first woman ever fly around the world thinks that I can do it, it again just silenced all the noise. And it was like, sorry, you're not Jerry Mock. You can't tell me, if I can do this. But it gave me so much confidence to stay strong with this vision and dream that I had.
I love that. I mean, it really does take one champion to really kind of reinvigorate that self-confidence, right? That you knew was there because you've been paving your own road this whole time. And it's not to say that you weren't doing without, the people around you. You obviously had a team and you had your family. But what I find the most interesting about this is that coming from the culture that you did, not wanting to bring attention to yourself, not wanting to toot your own horn, you really didn't involve your family that much in this 5-year long process. They obviously knew that you were doing it, but it was just not discussed because it was incredibly ambitious. And what's most amazing is that your family had never even seen you fly, let alone saw your Bonanza aircraft that you've been prepping with all this time until the day of your launch. So what was the family dynamic like? And what was that feeling with your family when they said goodbye?
I think like my whole aviation journey, I kept it to myself because it was something that like I don't think a lot of people in my family understood. And I knew I just didn't need pushback or confusion or, any of that from them. And quite honestly, I think my family, they're very loving and supportive. But when it's something that they don't understand, it's hard for them to show up for you. So I kept it to myself to the very last minute. The day that I took off to fly around the world by myself in a small plane, my sisters and my mom showed up to the airport to say goodbye. And my mom was crying so hard. Of course, she knew that I was going to do this, but she just didn't realize how small the plane was. And at one point, she's like, are they letting you do this? And I was like, Mom, who's they? Like I'm the one who like put this all together. And she was like, I know you can do it, but it's so scary. And, my mom said every single night she would wake up at 3 a.m. There's this prayer that you do. And, it's like really special. And she was every single night until you came back. I woke up at 3 and I prayed for you to make it safely. Yeah, and I got delayed in certain parts of the world, and I remember calling my dad, and he was just really scared. Like he didn't want to know details. He's like, "Are you okay?" "Yes." "Okay. Do you need anything?" "No." "Okay. All right. Well, we're waiting here for you in Afghanistan." And I'd be like, "Okay, see you soon." So I think it was really hard. They didn't know how to show up for me. They didn't know what questions to ask. And I knew that. I had their support, and that's really all that mattered, was that they were supporting me in doing this.
So one person that you mentioned was actually missing the day that you launched, which was your dad. And you alluded to us that he was in Afghanistan. And I want to get back to that. But I first want to talk about the beginning of your journey, because flying around the world is going to be anything but easy and smooth. So you faced a couple of setbacks and some doubts early on. Tell me about your flight, leaving North America, heading towards Europe.
Gosh, when I think back to this, the lie that my ego told me, like I'm not allowed to like dream this big. I remember the day I took off, someone had written on Facebook for like the launch picture, like, "Go Shasta, go, fly that airplane like you stole it." And I kind of chuckled at that comment, and I was like, wait a minute, did I steal it? Like, did I really do this? Did I really like get to this point? And I was like, but like, I'm not allowed to do that. Like it was very confusing for me. And then, I took off, which was incredible. I eventually made my way up to Canada, and I was getting ready to cross the Atlantic Ocean. And, I had never flown over an ocean before in a small plane by myself. Like I'd never done that before. And it's hard, but it's not impossible. You don't get to pick and choose what you want to do when you're flying around the world. It's the world. It's there. It doesn't change for anyone. Like you just have to accept those tough parts with all of the beautiful other parts that you experience when you go on a journey like this. So I knew I had to like make that crossing. And I took off from Halifax, Nova Scotia. I was flying in the Atlantic Ocean, going towards Santa Maria, an island off of the coast of Portugal in the Azores. And 3 hours into my flight, when you're out in the ocean or any remote part of the world, you use what we call HF, high frequency radio communications, which basically works off of like the positioning of the sun. And so, you make a radio call, it like bounces into the ionosphere, then bounces down to like these 7 different towers all over the world. And essentially, that's how you're able to communicate with air traffic control. It's very staticky. It's very like, to me, old technology. But as I'm flying along, 3 hours in, my HF antenna snaps off and I cannot communicate with anyone. I'm like there in the ocean. I encounter some icing conditions, which is extremely scary for, a small plane. And that's when like my heart sank and I'm like, why did I do this? Why am I here? Like it was so crippling. My hands were shaking. I was like, this is it. This is the end. And I remember having this talk with myself, like, get it together. Like, you've trained for this, turn the plane around, stay calm. I turned the plane around. I started to fly back towards land. I ended up landing in this small island called St. Pierre, and then eventually made my way to St. John's, Newfoundland. which is like the most northeast point of North America. And I remember being in my hotel room, like really, really like scared and crippled by this experience. It was so real and it was so scary. And, that's really when like the lies, the ego, everything started to like break me down. And I knew I had to like shut the emotions off and treat this trip very mechanically. Like you don't think, you just react. And I think what really got me through like that very tough moment, which was relatively the beginning of my trip, was just having a very strong why. Like I kept thinking back to like those women that were executed in that documentary. I kept thinking about like how sad it was that like I grew up and I just didn't know anything about aviation or like dreaming big, and how many other and boys are out there in the world that are experiencing that every day. And also, our nonprofit had gotten so many notes from kids around the world saying, "Hey, Shasta, I'm waiting for you. I get to meet you when you come to my country. I'll see you soon." And like, that's what really gave me the courage to get back in and say, "Sorry, ego. Sorry, all these lies. I got it. I got to give it all I have," and get back in and go on this trip.
That's what makes your story so incredible, though, because you're not trying to just set a world record, right? In fact, you have a very, very long journey, like 3 times the length of what Jerry Mock did. Your why is what kept you going, but your why is also what you kept discovering along the way. Something remarkable that happened in your journey that touched me, linked you right back to your culture again. So in Athens, Greece, you did a press conference and did some activities with an orphanage there. Tell me how your heritage and how Afghanistan shows up again.
So, Lilo, I did not realize Afghanistan was like the invisible string to my story up until I spoke with you in preparation of this conversation. And I'm so glad that you helped me realize that, because I didn't put those pieces together. After that situation over the Atlantic Ocean, everything else went very smooth. I ended up crossing the ocean. It was beautiful. It was so amazing. I remember when I got to across the Atlantic, there's the point of no return, where as a pilot, once you pass that point, you no longer have enough fuel to turn back around and land at the airport you took off from. So, like, you're really committed to your destination. I remember I looked up. It was so euphoric. I was like, in the history of the world, only 7 women have ever crossed this ocean in a single engine airplane. And I would have never guessed that the 8th woman would be this girl from Afghanistan who grew up just so unsure of everything around her, extremely shy. Nobody telling her she could do anything great, discovers aviation, and here she is, the 8th woman to do so. It blew my mind away, but it also reinforced why I needed to meet with as many kids to like be proof that, things are possible, dreams are possible. And so everything was going really well. I got to Greece and I felt like I had my first dose of reality in terms of like dealing with this mission of talking to young people. Like in theory, it sounds so perfect. Like you would show up in your flight suit, your airplane, but the truth is that there's a lot of kids struggling around the world. So when I went to Athens, Greece, my first outreach event was at an orphanage called the Smile of a Child, which is a very famous orphanage in Athens. I remember showing up in my flight suit, walking in, and a lot of the kids were refugees from Africa and just really all parts of Asia. It was a very big mixed group of people that were there in the room. And I stood in front of them and I was like, "Hi, I'm Shasta. I'm flying around the world." And they didn't care. When I was telling them that they could one day pursue aviation, it didn't register. They were just like, "You're such a privileged girl from America." And that's when I was like, okay, I need to like get real with them. So I sat down in this circle and I was like, "Okay, enough about me. Tell me about who you all are. How did you get here? What are your dreams?" And a lot of these kids were refugees separated from their families. and just kind of there. And, you know, as I was talking to this group of kids, there was a girl that kept coming in and out of the room and just like hysterically crying. And like what I noticed the most about her is like half of her face was burnt. And it was just like dry skin. And her sobs, they like still haunt me to this day, Lilo. It was so heartbreaking. It was like the sob of a child who has experienced such devastation. And I couldn't help but to like see her every time she would come in. And the other kids were like annoyed by her because I guess she had been there for some time and this was like her routine. So once it stopped, like the event stopped, I went to one of the women working there and I'm like, what's happening? Is she okay? And they're like, yeah, she's new to the orphanage. She came here about a week ago. And nobody can speak her language. So the agency is trying to find someone to come and speak, her language to like understand, what's going on. And I was like, well, what language does she speak? And they said Farsi. And I was like, what? And they're like, yeah, her name is Sarah. She came from Iran and she speaks Farsi. So I thought she was Iranian. And like I went up to her, I hugged her, I started speaking to her, and it turns out she's from Afghanistan. And she had made it to Afghanistan with her mom, and she had been there for some time. And she said that like one morning she woke up, her mom said they were going to go to the park, and they go. And when they get there, there's a man, and the mom says, go with this man. He is a trustworthy person. He's going to take you somewhere safe. And she was so confused and she went with this man and they eventually made it to Greece. And it just was so unreal to me that here I am on this around the world trip. This poor girl is so confused. She doesn't know where her mom is. And so I sit with her and like I tell her that there's a lot happening in Afghanistan. There's a lot happening in Iran. And her mom probably made the best decision for her life, for her future, for her safety. And I ended up spending the whole day there with her, with the other kids. And as I was leaving, I had told the kids, I'm going to come back here once the trip is done. And they were like, no way. Like nobody ever comes back. And I made a promise to them. And I gave them everything I had with me except my phone. I gave like my backpack, my water bottle. I just gave everything I had. I told Sarah, I gave her this journal that I had. I ripped out the pages that I wrote in and I said, just every day draw something. Like you are in a safe place. Like I was explaining it to her and she felt this sense of relief that like it was explained to her what was going on. And so I just thought, like, had I not been on this trip, had I not came to this orphanage, how long until an interpreter would have come? And would that interpreter have been as delicate and like caring and compassionate to like, break it to her in a way where she can like digest it better? So that was really powerful, very emotional, and yet like one of the most amazing things that happened to me at these outreach events.
It's so powerful and obviously so moving. Both of us are crying. I know you can't hear it, but we both are. But I think that's what made your journey so powerful. And obviously on this trip around the globe, you had to stop in Afghanistan. But it's 2017. It's still at war, right? U.S. forces are still there. You flying your aircraft into Kabul as an American Afghan, but also American woman is just, it's not feasible. It's not safe. But you knew in your heart that you could not go. So this trip is so pivotal. And in fact, the whole world knew it too, right? You have the FAA, you have ICAO, you've got the UN that is supporting you. And your arrival was actually organized by the United Nations, and hundreds of Afghan girls were there waiting for you. But one important person was also waiting for you there, which was your dad. So you told me that this event was really heavily secured. It had moved multiple times. And as somebody who has experience in combat in Afghanistan, I myself have flown hundreds of hours there and spent months and months there. To me, automatically in my mind was, you are a target for the Taliban. Your presence is a threat for the Taliban. So, how did it feel to return to your homeland? And did you recognize how important, how dangerous, how groundbreaking, how monumental your arrival was?
Yeah, it's actually interesting. When I had sent our insurance company the route, I had put in there that I would fly into Kabul, and they rejected that whole route because of the stop in Afghanistan. They were like, "I'm sorry, we can't insure it. It's extremely dangerous for especially general aviation, small aircraft to fly into Kabul. Like, there's just no way we can insure that stop or this trip with that stop included." And I just remember being so bummed, like, how am I going to go around the world and not go to the country of my birth? Like,
Hmm.
there's no way. And I started to think about this like sense of duty of like, that documentary. And I'm like, I have to find a way to go there. Like, I have to. And so I ended up leaving the plane in Dubai, flying an airliner into Kabul. And quite honestly, I wasn't sure how things were going to go. I thought maybe I would show up and the girls would be like, who is this American trying to tell us like what to dream? Like, I just thought the women have gone through so much, since the dawn of it coming together as a country. There's just been these highs and lows for women in our country. Like, are they even going to be fazed by my bravery of flying in a plane around the world when their reality is not making it after getting off from school, going to the walk home, just it's so dynamic. So I didn't have any expectations of like how I would be received. And to my surprise, when I showed up, there was this huge celebration of girls just smiling, joy, people with musical instruments just playing loudly. It was just remarkable. I didn't expect that. And I just felt like I was with my people. And so, yeah, it was just really incredible to be there, to include them and for them to receive me like that. It was just really, I can't even describe it to you, Lilo. It was just amazing.
What was it like to see your dad catching you there?
Oh my gosh, my dad was he my father never in my life has told me that he's proud of me. Like, even when I got my licenses, I never heard it come out of his mouth. But the way that my dad was looking at me and just the way he would talk about me, and the reason why I say this is because like my Farsi is not that great. So when people would ask questions, he would have to like fill in the gaps of like what I'm trying to say. And the way that he talked about my trip, my journey, my mission, he was just such a proud father. And I had never seen that side of him. And at points, he would even get emotional. Like, my dad is like a lion. Like, I've never seen him break or cry or any of that. So it was just like a full circle moment for me. I left that country when I was a baby, and my dad was so unsure of what was going to happen to his family. To me, I was just born, and there I was coming back as this like celebrated pilot. And I was able to like kind of pay it forward, or like that sense of duty that I had after watching that documentary. I was like, I feel like I'm doing something, which is really cool for me to witness and for me to see that with my dad.
And did you realize that you were a national treasure at this point? Because you're going to the presidential palace and you are being escorted in heavily armed convoys with your dad. Did it ever dawn on you how truly impactful, not just for those girls, but for your country, for this government, for all the people that were there, how incredibly pivotal this moment was?
Honestly, no. I think I was more focused on meeting these 400 brave girls who are going to school, becoming educated. Like, for me, it was relatively easy. Like, it wasn't easy, but like I had opportunities, whereas these 400 brave girls who showed up to celebrate me, I felt like we're celebrating the wrong people here. Like, they need to be celebrated. They're getting an education in a place where women are just now being able to go to school. So I didn't at all. Like, the whole time I kept reflecting back to them. And it was until like after I left and the trip finished where I was like, oh my gosh, like that happened. I went to the presidential palace. I spoke with the first lady, the president. I got to meet all these ministers of like education, of women's rights. Like, it just started to like unpack for me. And I was like, wow. It was just a lot happening, quite honestly, that I didn't realize any of it in the moment.
And this is barely halfway around your trip, but 145 days after you take off that first day, 24,000 miles later, damage to your aircraft, medical setbacks that we didn't even talk about, bouts of inclement weather, you finally make it back home. But something deeper was happening, because this wasn't just about personal accolades, as we talked about. You were discovering your true purpose. So near the end of your trip, when you're finally getting to US soil, you're coming into Hawaii, what did you realize had changed in you during your journey?
Gosh, so much. Crossing the ocean, the Pacific Ocean, from Hawaii to America, it was a long trip. It was 17 hours in a small airplane, just kind of flying along. And I had so much to think about and to reflect. And I think really that's how the time went by so fast. I just remember having this moment where I thought, like, in the grand scheme of things, no matter who you are, no matter where you were born, what set of circumstances you grow up in, if there's something that you want and you want it really bad and you're willing to go against the tide, against all of the lies that people tell you, that you tell yourself, like, if you have the courage to just keep going, you can accomplish anything. And I mean, it's hard work. It's a lot of dedication, but it was this big realization, like the messaging that I was trying to share, it just concreted in my mind. And I knew that, like, there's so many misconceptions. Like, nowadays we live in a place where, like, there's these man-made borders that divide us. But Lilo, when you're flying around the world so close to the Earth's surface, 7,000 feet above ground, you don't see any borders. Like, when I saw the girls in London, they look no different to me than the girls in Afghanistan or Australia or Indonesia. Like, we are truly from the human race. We are all the same. Like, we may speak differently and look differently, but like, our core, it's all the same. It's of the human race. And there's so much unnecessary division out there that divides us. And it is so sad to see that. There's a lot of amazing people in the world. And I just hope that we all get to open our hearts, open our minds, and, see the good, and challenge ourselves to go out there and meet people from these different parts of the world and see for yourself of how similar we are than we are different.
And you still have a lot to unpack from this journey, it sounds like, because how could it not be so life-changing? But when you came home, you went headfirst into building Dreams Soar even bigger. And it's involved into much more than just aviation inspiration. And today you're hoping that it's going to be a one-stop hub for the aviation industry, but it's also become your platform for advocacy. So I would love to talk about your current work with human rights, particularly for the women and girls of Afghanistan. And I'd love to play this clip from your very first episode, season 1, episode 1 from 2022, from your podcast called Aviate with Shaesta, which featured Nobel Peace Prize nominee Dr. Seema Samar.
But I do hope that they will continue support Afghanistan, because again, it's already showed in the history. It will be, again, in my personal view, that the problem will not stay in Afghanistan. It will reach to the other part of the world.
Sadly, yeah.
And I think promotion and protection of human rights is a shared responsibility.
How does that warning land for you now? How does it feel And how does it fuel your work today?
You know, Lilo, it's so devastating because I got to witness some of the progress Afghanistan was unfolding when I went there on my around the world trip. Yes, there was war, but there were also so many opportunities for girls to go to events like the outreach event that we had, to become educated, to write books, to start nonprofits, to start businesses, to educate themselves and educate the children that they're nurturing at home. I mean, it was still very dangerous, but there was this big horizon of hope. And since the United States pulled out of Afghanistan in 2022, Afghanistan at the moment is the only country in the world that's prohibiting women to have secondary and high school education. The only country in the world. Women are no longer allowed to go out in public for a walk or even to go to the grocery store without a male chaperone. And some of the laws are so restricting that it doesn't allow women to speak in public. And it's devastating for so many reasons. I think at that conversation with Dr. Sima Samad, she's such an inspiration. Her work is really a legacy. My biggest takeaway is that the future is in our hands, the hands of this youth that's, is going to be able to become leaders someday. And it's so devastating of how backwards and how quickly we went back in time in Afghanistan since the US left. I think one of the themes that I highlighted in that conversation is injustice somewhere is injustice everywhere. And I think right now it's happening in Afghanistan, but it could easily happen in other parts of the world. I just think about all of the girls who were given this light and now that light's taken away. I can't imagine how devastated they are. And this is something that I want to focus my energy on. I'm focusing on building an industry hub so that when young people learn about aviation, they can find resources. But in addition to that, a big passion of mine is to bring awareness. So I'm collaborating with other Afghan leaders and influencers who are women for us to come together and create a campaign that's going to be impactful and is going to let the women in Afghanistan know that we haven't forgotten about you and that this is truly devastating and we're acknowledging that. So there's so much more work to be done, but it's really sad, Lilo.
So we see that they're trying to take away women's rights to dream, right? And you went from someone who was told that you had no right to dream to someone whose very presence was a threat to those who would silence those dreams. So what's your truth now, Shaesta? What does it mean for you to deserve to dream big? How do you carry that responsibility now?
First, it doesn't matter who you are. If your dreams are big, you deserve to have them. There is enough room for everybody to dream whatever it is they want in this world. And most importantly now, I've been so fortunate to have this dream and go out there and experience it, see it come together. And I need to empower others so that they can have the opportunity to do the same. And I think right now for women in Afghanistan, it's as simple as dreaming to walk out their door and be able to read a book or learn how to write. It's just such basic, simple human rights. So I carry more responsibility, but I'm doing it in a way where before it was this theory, it was this idea that was fueled by my upbringing, my experiences, and a very powerful documentary. Now, my dreams and my work is fueled by faces and names and people and locations. And so the motivation is matching the mission at hand. And so I will always continue to advocate for Afghan women, and I will never speak for them. I will try to be the microphone for them because they are the ones who know what they need from the world, from people like me. I was in this phase of inspiring, and now it's all about empowering them, giving the youth resources, giving women resources. So that's kind of where I am with my lie and, my future.
What would you say to someone who's holding themselves back because they don't think they deserve their big dreams, especially young women, immigrants, anyone caught between two worlds, or somebody who's coming from an unprivileged circumstance?
I think the biggest lesson that I learned, that I think more people, I wish they knew, is that nobody can define your limitations or what you're capable of doing or dreaming. No one can define that other than yourself. Your parents can't, your counselors can't, your spouse can't. Only you know what you are capable of achieving. You set those boundaries. If you think you can do it, you can do it. If you think you can't, then you can't. Growing up, I let so many people define what I was capable of doing. And when I unlocked my potential and I silenced that noise, I was so surprised to see how much I could do. So don't let anyone define your limitations or your dreams in life. Only you can do that.
Well, Shasta, thank you for giving us the courage to dream big. Your story proves that when we claim our right to soar, it gives others permission to reach for the sky too. So if Shasta's story inspired you, pick up a copy of Fly Girl Fly. Shaesta Waiz soars around the world. It's a beautiful children's book that tells her incredible journey. And here's the best part. Shaesta donates all of her proceeds directly to Dreams Soar scholarship funds. You can find it anywhere books are sold and learn more about Dreams Soar at shaestawaiz.com or on our resources page at liesmyego.com. And speaking of supporting dreams, if this conversation moved you, if Shasta's story made you think differently about your own right to dream big, here's how you can help us keep bringing these conversations to the world. Leave us a review wherever you're listening right now, or share this episode with someone who needs to hear that they deserve so much more. So here's to bold dreams, the audacity to pursue them, and the courage to lift others as we climb. Thank you for listening. And Shaesta, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for being here. This was such a beautiful conversation with you.
Lilo, when I say that I'm a fan of your podcast, every time I listen to it, I have such chills. And I think your conversations are so raw and real. We don't have enough of these types of conversations. It just really inspires me to think deeply. And I so appreciate you doing this work and bringing these conversations to life, because they're certainly helping me, and I can't imagine how many others this is impacting. So thank you for everything that you do.
Oh, thank you, sister.